you said that your dad was a leftist and your mom was a liberal. A lot of people conflate those terms. So when you're speaking in that terminology, what is the distinction between the left and liberals or liberalism?
Well, it's such a great question, Zuby. And there's a lot of ways in which I'm like, liberals are all on the political right now, in the sense of liberals being the ones that, you know, want to protect freedom of speech or
classical liberalism.
Kind of classical liberalism. If you think of it, you know, in the traditional French parliament after the French Revolution, and on the right were the ones that wanted censorship, and the ones on the left wanted more freedom of speech. They wanted, you know, that's different now, obviously. So that's where the left-right stuff doesn't explain itself. I'll give you another example that's really wigging me out. After the so I'm from Colorado. So when the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Trump could not be on the ballot, I call my parents, you know, I'm like, what do you think of this? And we're pretty different places now, as you might imagine. But it was my dad who was like, I think that they should let Trump be on the ballot.
Okay.
And it was more my mom who was like, I don't think he should be. So it's which is another confusing thing. I do find sometimes my allies on the free speech issue do come more from the radical left than from the liberal left. People like Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi or Aaron Mate or some of the critics of American imperialism, more in that Chomsky wing. And notably Chomsky.
Are those guys considered more radical left?
I think that's where I think they traditionally had been. I mean, now Glenn Greenwald is
called conservative.
Yeah. Except for on Israel, right? So there's sort of some interesting things going on there. But yeah, I mean, even Chomsky like has this really Chomsky's amazing quote. I think it's I'll butcher it, but I think it was something like, it's a disservice to the survivors of the Holocaust to censor in their name. And, you know, in fact, as we learn more about what was actually going on in Germany in the 20s and 30s, they were censoring. The Weimar Republic was engaged in censorship against Nazis.
Yeah.
Our view, of course, as Americans, is that better to let the Nazis speak so that we can argue with them and disagree with them. And also they have human rights too, of course. But I think it's been interesting that it's really the folks that are more not from the radical left, more from the liberal left, sort of the MSNBC left, you might say, that has been the ones demanding, I think, a greater crackdown on speech and restrictions on democracy.
It's so fascinating to me because it's such a bastardization of terms. Because by definition, liberal, if someone is against free speech and they're calling themselves a liberal, or they want opponent candidates taken off ballots, or they're trying to shut people down, or the internet, or deplatform people. It's all these things are very illiberal.
Yes.
So it's interesting how the terminology is being used when someone says, oh, that person is super liberal. And what they mean is they're super pro censorship and they're anti-free speech and they were pro lockdown and pro mandate and all that. I'm like, isn't the word liberal based in liberty, based in freedom, based in individual rights and so on? So it's fascinating how this inversion's happened. And I think the way the terms are also understood, I've noticed in the conservative or right wing sphere, is actually is kind of the opposite. So they view people on the left and leftists as being the ones who are pro-censorship and anti-free speech and so on, and that liberals are the ones who are more reasonable, and allied with sane conservatives in that regard. But it's what do you think of that?
No, I think first of all, the observation is absolutely spot on. It's confusing when you're like, the most liberal people are illiberal. Doesn't make any sense. Except for it does, obviously. We know what everyone means when they talk about that. I think another interesting example that I'm obsessed with and is at the heart of my book, San Francisco, is just that the most compassionate people are engaged in the greatest amounts of cruelty. So to give an example of it, I would keep discovering, psychotic people, mentally ill, deeply addicted people on the streets, vulnerable, naked, the women on the streets that are homeless and usually addicts or some combination with mental illness, or like basically 100% sexual assault for women on the street. When I interview women on the street, it's like 100%.
Wow.
And multiple times. Horrible situation. I've discovered a guy on the street that had a broken broken hip, have discovered, people that are in just terrible situations, they need to be taken to hospital, But the most compassionate people, or the people that say they're the most compassionate, are making the case, no, you should just do whatever they want. And so you're affirming a psychiatric disorder effectively on the streets. So yeah, things become their opposite. Not to get too fancy, but that is kind of Hegel and stuff, right? Yeah. It's that these things like the seed of its destruction lies in, or the yin and the yang. There's the destruction comes from within. The opposite is embedded in the thing itself. So definitely think that that's the case with both of those examples of compassion and liberalism. These values have to be in relationship to other values. And in the case of, I think in the case of liberals becoming illiberal, in some ways, it's also a view that compassion and caring are the most important thing. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Haidt's work, the psychologist, he says basically what we call progressivism is basically a rejection of all traditional values except for one, which is caring. Mm-hmm. So it's in the name of caring that progressives would deprive you of your free speech rights. Yeah. You're going to say hurtful things, and we have to protect people from hurtful things, and therefore we have to deprive you of your free speech rights. That's basically the rationale.
Gotcha. So when you use the term progressives, are you talking to people who are in that liberal sphere, but who are even further along with it? Is that what progressive means to you?
Yeah, I think progressive probably defines those folks. I think progressives defines... For me, progressives is like synonymous with woke.
Okay.
We actually had it, my colleagues and I, when we had the subtitle, we were trying to figure out the subtitle of San Francisco. The original subtitle was Why the Left Ruins Cities. And then there was some disagreement about that because there are people on the moderate Democrats who would still identify as part of the left that would like to have, a better response to this issue. So we landed on progressives. And yeah, I think it's really the progressives who are sort of, they're not really the radical left and they're not really what we'd call liberal, but they're almost like a group. They tend to be for censorship. They're for, affirming psychiatric disorders. They're in the grip of victimhood ideology. And I think victimhood ideology is the central motivating, animating ideology behind what you would call the progressive movement. And I mean Elizabeth Edwards to AOC.
Yeah. So I know I've read your book, San Francisco. It's a brilliant and eye-opening read because first time I ever came to San Francisco was in 2019. And I'm very well traveled. I've been to many dozens of countries. I've been to hundreds of cities. And I remember coming in 2019 and seeing things that I've never seen in all of my travels. I've been back to San Francisco multiple times since then. I came last year again, actually, to interview Elon. And the day before that interview, I did a 10-mile walk around the city just to see, okay, I have a certain vision of it in my mind from 2019. Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? I don't want to have an inaccurate view of what it is just based off things I'm seeing on social media or certain videos or whatever. So I took a stroll, went through Tenderloin, downtown, all of that, Market Street, and it was probably worse than in 2019. It was a bit more dead. It was more of a dead zone. Like maybe it never quite recovered from the shutdowns, but just despair is the word that I would use to describe it. Just some of the things that I saw down there just in the few days that I've spent and seen, and it was blowing my mind. Coming from the UK, I was like, I've never seen this in the UK. I've never seen this anywhere in Europe. I haven't seen this in Africa. I haven't seen it in the Middle East. And so I was really interested to read your book just to find out how did it get like this? Especially because the thing I kept hearing was, Zuby, it didn't used to be like this. If you came to the city 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was beautiful. It was so much cleaner. There weren't all of these problems.